The blood dripped from her face onto the dusty floorboards of the saloon, while the woman who had thrown the acid ran screaming into the night, and Josephine Fletcher knew in that moment her life would never be the same. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a searing agony that made her collapse to her knees as the other patrons of the establishment scattered in horror. It was April of 1878 in Granite, Colorado, a mining town nestled in the Rocky Mountains, where silver had brought fortune seekers from every corner of the country. Josephine had come here 6 months earlier with dreams of opening a dress shop, using the small inheritance her mother had left her to build something of her own in this rough frontier town. The woman who had attacked her was Margaret Preston, the wife of a mine owner who had convinced herself that Josephine was having an affair with her husband. It was not true, had never been true, but Margaret had seen her husband speaking with Josephine outside the general store one afternoon, and jealousy had poisoned her mind until she could think of nothing else. She had mixed lye and water in a bottle, waited for Josephine to enter the saloon, where she sometimes took her evening meal, and thrown it directly into her face before anyone could stop her. Dr. Harrison worked on Josephine for hours that night, cleaning the burns, applying ointments, bandaging what he could. When he finally allowed her to look in a mirror 3 weeks later, Josephine stared at the reflection of a stranger. The left side of her face was twisted and scarred, the skin puckered and discolored in shades of angry red and pale white. Her left eye was miraculously unharmed, as was her right side, but the damage was extensive enough that people would stare, that children would cry, that her dreams of running a respectable business were likely destroyed. Margaret Preston had been arrested and sent to Denver to await trial, but that brought Josephine no comfort as she sat in her small room above the dress shop she had barely managed to open, staring at her reflection and wondering what would become of her now. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and now marked in a way that would make decent society turn away from her. The other women in town had been sympathetic at first, bringing her food and offering prayers, but she could see the relief in their eyes that it had not happened to them, could sense their eagerness to leave her presence and return to their unblemished lives. It was on a morning in early June when Samuel Irving first rode into Granite. He was a cowboy who had spent the last 5 years driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, from Kansas to Wyoming, wherever the work took him. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from hard work, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land just outside of Granite, intending to start his own ranch with a handful of cattle and the stubborn determination that had carried him through every hardship he had faced since leaving his family's failing farm in Missouri at 18. Samuel needed supplies, which was what brought him to the general store on his second day in town. He was examining saddles when he noticed the woman standing near the fabric display, her back to him, her posture suggesting she was trying to make herself as small as possible. She wore a blue calico dress that was clean but showed signs of careful mending, and her honey-colored hair was pulled back in a simple bun. When she turned slightly, he caught a glimpse of the left side of her face and understood why she was standing in the corner farthest from the other customers. What struck Samuel was not the scarring, though he noticed it, but the way she held herself, like someone expecting a blow. He finished his business with the saddles and was about to leave when he saw one of the other customers, a thin woman in an elaborate hat, deliberately move away from Josephine with an expression of distaste. Something about that casual cruelty made Samuel's jaw tighten. He'd seen enough meanness in the world, had experienced enough of it himself growing up poor and unwanted, to recognize it instantly. Josephine was trying to purchase thread when she became aware of someone standing nearby. She tensed, waiting for the inevitable reaction, the gasp or the muttered excuse to move away. Instead, a deep voice said, "Excuse me, miss, but I am new to this area and wondered if you might recommend where a man could find decent lumber for building." She turned slowly, keeping the right side of her face toward him as much as possible, and found herself looking at a cowboy with kind eyes and an earnest expression. "The sawmill is at the north end of town," she said quietly, her voice still strong despite everything that had happened. "Mr. Henderson runs it. Tell him what you need, and he will give you a fair price." "Much appreciated," Samuel said, and then, because he genuinely wanted to know, "Are you familiar with building? I'm planning to put up a small ranch house and could use advice from someone who knows the area. Josephine hesitated, surprised by the question. Most people could not get away from her fast enough these days. My father was a carpenter, she said slowly. I helped him sometimes when I was young. The altitude here affects how wood cures, and the winters are harsh. You will want to make sure your roof can handle heavy snow. That is exactly the kind of knowledge I need, Samuel said, and his smile was genuine. Would you be willing to look at my plans? I would pay for your time, of course. Something flickered in Josephine's eyes, something that might have been hope or might have been suspicion. Why are you asking me? Samuel met her gaze directly, those storm-gray eyes steady on hers. He had not looked away from her face, had not flinched from the scarring, had simply spoken to her as he would speak to anyone. Because you seem like someone who knows what she is talking about, and I would rather have good advice than make expensive mistakes. The simplicity of his answer, the straightforward honesty in it, made something loosen in Josephine's chest. I suppose I could look at your plans, she said carefully. I have a shop 2 streets over, the one with the blue door, Fletcher's dressmaking. I'm usually there in the afternoons. I will bring them by tomorrow if that suits you, Samuel said. He tipped his hat to her, nodded politely, and left the store without any of the awkwardness or pity she'd come to expect from people. That night, Josephine found herself thinking about the cowboy's eyes and the way he had looked at her without flinching. She told herself not to be foolish, that he was probably just being kind out of Christian charity or because he genuinely needed advice. But still, the memory of being treated like a normal person warmed something inside her that had been cold since the attack. Samuel did come by the next afternoon, carrying a rolled set of plans that were more ambitious than Josephine had expected. She spread them out on her cutting table and studied them carefully, aware of him standing beside her, smelling of leather and pine and honest sweat. "You're planning something substantial," she observed. "I intend to make a real go of ranching," Samuel said, "not just a temporary thing. I want to build something that lasts." Josephine pointed to several places on the plans where she suggested modifications, explaining about wind patterns and snow load and the way the summer rains could wash out poorly positioned foundations. Samuel listened intently, asking intelligent questions, and when she finally rolled up the plans again, he looked at her with something like respect. "You know your business," he said. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Josephine said. "It was just conversation." "Then let me buy you dinner," Samuel said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. "As a thank you." Josephine's hand went instinctively to the left side of her face, a gesture Samuel was already beginning to recognize. "I do not think that would be wise," she said quietly. "People talk." "Let them talk," Samuel said. "I'm asking if you would like to have dinner with me, not if you think other people would approve." The boldness of it, the complete disregard for what others might think, was so foreign to Josephine's recent experience that she could only stare at him. "Why?" she asked finally, the question barely more than a whisper. Samuel considered his answer carefully. "Because I enjoyed talking with you. Because you are clearly intelligent, and I would like to know more about this town from someone who seems to see it clearly. And because I think you could use a friend, and God knows I could as well. Friendship. Not pity, not charity, but friendship." Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "The restaurant will not want me there," she said, hating how defeated she sounded. "I tried to eat there last week, and the owner suggested I might be more comfortable taking my meal elsewhere." Anger flashed across Samuel's face, quick and hot. "Then we will eat somewhere else. Do you cook?" "Yes," Josephine said, confused by the question. "Then I will bring steaks tomorrow, and you can show me if you are as skilled in the kitchen as you are with carpentry knowledge," Samuel said, "if that would be acceptable to you." It was wildly improper, of course, having a man to her rooms for dinner, but Josephine found she did not care. Propriety had done nothing to protect her from acid or cruelty, and here was someone offering genuine companionship. "That would be acceptable," she said. Samuel's smile transformed his entire face, and Josephine felt her breath catch at the sight of it. He was handsome in a rugged way, but more than that, there was a goodness in him that she could sense, a decency that made her want to trust him despite all her reasons for caution. True to his word, Samuel arrived the next evening with 2 thick steaks wrapped in butcher paper, along with potatoes and a small jar of preserved peaches. Josephine cooked while Samuel sat at her small table and told her about his plans for the ranch, about the cattle he hoped to buy, about the string of horses he wanted to breed. She found herself relaxing as she worked, asking questions, even laughing when he described his first disastrous attempt at breaking a horse when he was 15. "I was so determined to prove I could do it," Samuel said, his eyes bright with the memory. "That horse threw me 7 times before my father finally told me I needed to try patience instead of stubbornness." "Did it work?" Josephine asked, setting the plates on the table. "Eventually," Samuel admitted. "Turned out that horse just needed someone to be gentle with him. He had been mistreated before we got him and did not trust easy. Once I figured that out, we got along fine." He paused, then added quietly, "Sometimes I think people are like that too. They just need someone to be patient and see past the reasons they have for being skittish." Josephine met his eyes and knew he was talking about her, but there was no pity in his expression, only understanding. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and then Samuel asked about her dress shop, about how business was going. Josephine was honest with him in a way she had not been with anyone else. "Easer. It is failing," she said bluntly. "I had 3 customers in the first month I was open before the attack. Since then, I've had none. Women do not want a scarred seamstress making their dresses. They think it is catching, or that I am cursed, or simply that they do not want to look at me while being fitted." "That is their loss," Samuel said with conviction. "The mending on your dress is some of the finest I have ever seen. My mother did sewing for extra money when I was growing up, and I know quality work when I see it." "Quality work does not matter if no one will hire me to do it," Josephine said, but Samuel could hear the pain beneath the practical words. They talked late into the evening, long after the dishes were cleared and the lamp oil was burning low. Samuel told her about growing up in Missouri, about leaving home when the farm failed, about the years of hard work that had finally earned him enough to buy his own land. Josephine told him about her mother's death, about coming to Granite with hope and determination, about the attack that had changed everything. When Samuel finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "May I call on you again?" he asked formally. "I would like that," Josephine said, and meant it. So began a pattern that continued through June and into July. Samuel would ride into town several times a week, always with some excuse, needing advice about construction or wanting Josephine's opinion on fabric for curtains or simply wanting company. He never came empty-handed, always bringing something to share, a rabbit he had shot, fresh eggs from a neighbor, wildflowers he had picked on the ride into town. The people of Granite watched this development with varying degrees of surprise and disapproval. Samuel became aware of the whispers, the way people looked at him with curiosity or pity, assuming he was either ignorant of Josephine's scarring or too desperate for female company to care. He ignored them all with the same calm determination he brought to everything in his life. What Samuel could not ignore was the way his feelings for Josephine were deepening with each visit. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day, remembering something she had said, planning what he would talk to her about next. He loved her intelligence and her dry humor, the way she would tease him gently about his optimistic plans for the ranch. He loved the careful way she moved, like a dancer, and the sound of her laugh when he managed to truly amuse her. Most of all, he loved her eyes. They were a remarkable shade of green, like new leaves in spring, and they held depths of emotion that took his breath away. When Josephine looked at him, really looked at him, Samuel felt seen in a way he never had before. She noticed things about him that no one else did, remembered details of stories he told, asked questions that showed she was truly listening. For Josephine, Samuel's continued presence in her life was like water after a drought. She had been so lonely, so convinced that no one would ever look past her scars to see her, and here was this man who seemed genuinely interested in who she was rather than what had happened to her. She caught herself watching for him on the days she knew he might come to town, found herself taking extra care with her appearance, even though she told herself it did not matter. It was in late July when things shifted between them. Samuel had brought lumber into town to be planned at the mill, and he stopped by Josephine's shop afterward, covered in sawdust and grinning about the progress on his house. "The frame is up," he announced. "You should ride out and see it. Make sure I followed your advice properly." "I do not ride," Josephine said, looking away. Why not? Samuel asked, genuinely curious. Because I do not want to subject the people of this town to having to see me, Josephine said, more sharply than she intended. It is bad enough that I walk to the general store when I must. I will not parade myself around the countryside. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Josephine, look at me. She turned reluctantly, bracing herself for pity or false reassurance. Instead, Samuel stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the sawdust and sweat on his skin. I need you to understand something, he said quietly. When I look at you, I see the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen. I see intelligence and strength and courage. I see a woman who has survived something terrible and is still standing. I see someone I want to spend time with, someone whose company I value more than anyone else's in this God-forsaken town. You see the scars too, Josephine whispered. Do not pretend you do not. Of course I see them, Samuel said. But they do not define you, Josephine. They are part of your story. But they are not the whole story, not even close to the most important part. And anyone who cannot see past them to who you really are is a fool not worth your concern. Tears were streaming down Josephine's face now, both the scarred left side and the unblemished right. I am afraid, she admitted. I'm afraid to hope that someone could care for me like this. I'm afraid you will wake up one day and realize you have made a mistake. Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped the tears from her right cheek with his thumb. He did not touch the scarred side, understanding instinctively that she might not be ready for that yet. I'm not going to wake up and change my mind, he said. I know what I feel, Josephine. I'm falling in love with you. I've been falling in love with you since that first day in the general store, when you held your head high despite everything and gave me honest, useful advice. Samuel, Josephine breathed, his name a prayer and a question all at once. You do not have to say anything back, Samuel said quickly. I just needed you to know how I feel. I needed you to understand that when I ask you to ride out to see my ranch, it is because I am building something I hope you might want to share with me someday. Not out of pity or charity, but because I cannot imagine wanting to share it with anyone else. Josephine looked up at him, at this good, honest man who had seen past her scars to who she really was, and felt something break open inside her chest. I am falling in love with you too, she said, her voice shaking. I have been trying not to, trying to protect myself, but I cannot help it. You make me feel human again, Samuel. You make me feel seen. Samuel's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Then come see the ranch with me, he said. Please, I will bring a horse gentle enough for even a non-rider, and we can go slowly. And I promise you do not have to worry about what anyone thinks. So Josephine found herself, 2 days later, mounted on a placid gray mare named Daisy, riding alongside Samuel out of Granite toward his land. The town was mostly behind them, when she realized she had forgotten to feel self-conscious about her face, too caught up in the challenge of staying on the horse and the beauty of the mountain landscape around them. Samuel's land was beautiful, a valley nestled between rocky hills with a clear stream running through it and meadows where cattle could graze. The frame of his house stood on a slight rise, positioned exactly as Josephine had suggested to catch the morning sun and avoid the worst of the winter winds. He helped her down from Daisy and walked her through the skeleton of rooms, pointing out where the kitchen would be, where he planned to put windows, how he had modified the roof design based on her advice. It is wonderful, Josephine said honestly, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. You're building something real here, Samuel. I am trying, Samuel said. He moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the valley spread before them. I keep thinking about what it would look like finished. A garden over there, maybe. A barn for the horses, cattle in the meadow, a porch where someone could sit in the evening and watch the sunset. Someone? Josephine asked softly. Samuel turned to face her fully. You, if you will have me. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months. But Josephine, I am certain. I want to build this life with you. I want to come home to you every evening and tell you about my day. I want to hear your opinions and your advice and your laughter. I want to wake up beside you every morning and know that I am the luckiest man alive. Josephine's hand trembled as she raised it to touch his face, mirroring the gesture he had made when wiping away her tears. "I want that too," she whispered. "But Samuel, you need to understand what you would be taking on. People will talk. They will say terrible things about you for marrying someone like me. Your business might suffer. Your reputation might suffer." "Let it," Samuel said fiercely. "I do not care about reputation or gossip or anything else except building a life with the woman I love. Marry me, Josephine. Be my wife. Help me turn this frame into a home." "Yes," Josephine said, the word coming out on a sob of pure joy. "Yes, I will marry you." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were something precious, and Josephine buried her face against his chest and cried, releasing months of pain and loneliness and fear. When she finally pulled back, Samuel cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs gentle on both the scarred side and the smooth side, treating all of her with the same tenderness. "You're so beautiful," he said, and kissed her forehead, her right cheek, the tip of her nose. He did not kiss her lips yet, sensing somehow that she needed time, needed to know he meant everything he said. "The most beautiful woman I have ever seen." They were married 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the small church at the edge of town. The pastor agreed to perform the service, though his wife made her disapproval clear by refusing to attend. A handful of people showed up, mostly out of curiosity, Samuel suspected, but he did not care. All that mattered was Josephine standing beside him in a dress she had made herself, pale yellow cotton with green ribbons that matched her eyes, promising to love him for the rest of her life. Samuel wore his best shirt and pants, both brushed clean of trail dust, and when he slipped his mother's wedding ring onto Josephine's finger, his hand was steady with certainty. The pastor pronounced them man and wife, and Samuel kissed Josephine for the first time, gentle and sweet, in front of God and witnesses, and anyone who cared to judge. They spent their wedding night in Josephine's rooms above the dress shop, since the house was not yet finished enough to live in. Samuel was patient and tender, letting Josephine set the pace, reassuring her with words and touches that he desired her, wanted her, found her beautiful in every way. When Josephine finally relaxed into his arms, trusting him completely, the intimacy between them was everything she had feared she would never experience. "I love you," Samuel whispered into her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. "I love every part of you." "I love you too," Josephine said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. She had been so broken, so convinced her life was over, and here she was, married to a good man who saw her truly, beginning a new chapter she had never imagined possible. The next months were busy ones. Samuel worked dawn to dusk on finishing the house, hiring occasional help when he needed it, but doing most of the work himself. Josephine closed her dress shop in town and moved what supplies she could salvage out to the ranch, setting up a workspace in what would become the spare bedroom. She helped with the house where she could, cleaning and organizing and offering opinions on everything from window placement to the color they should paint the kitchen walls. Money was tight those first months, with Samuel's savings going mostly toward building materials and buying a small starter herd of cattle. Josephine took in mending work from neighboring ranches, swallowing her pride and her fear of rejection, and was surprised to find that people who lived outside of town seemed less concerned with her appearance. Ranch wives appreciated quality work at reasonable prices, and word slowly spread that Samuel Irving's wife was a skilled seamstress. Their first winter together was harsh, with snow piling high against the walls of the house and temperatures dropping so low that the water in their bedroom basin froze solid overnight. Samuel had followed Josephine's advice about the roof, and it held strong against the weight of the snow. They spent long evenings by the fire, Samuel carving wood and mending tack while Josephine sewed, both of them talking about their plans for spring. It was during that winter that Josephine truly came to understand the depth of Samuel's love for her. He never flinched from her scars, never made her feel like she needed to hide or apologize for her appearance. He would trace the damaged skin with gentle fingers while they lay in bed, telling her stories, making her laugh, treating that part of her face with the same care and affection he showed to all of her. "Does it still hurt?" he asked one night, his fingers ghosting over the worst of the scarring. "Sometimes," Josephine admitted. "When the weather changes, or when I am very tired, it aches." "I wish I could have stopped it from happening," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "I wish I could have protected you from that pain." "You have given me something better," Josephine said, turning to face him fully. "You have given me a life I never thought I could have. You have given me love and respect and a home. You have made me feel beautiful when the whole world told me I was hideous. That is worth more than you can possibly know." Samuel kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, showing her with his body what words could not express. Later, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms beneath layers of quilts, Josephine thought about how strange fate was, how the worst moment of her life had somehow led to the best thing that had ever happened to her. Spring came with an explosion of wildflowers across the meadows and new calves wobbling after their mothers. Samuel was busy from before dawn until after dark, riding fence lines and checking on the herd and handling all the countless tasks that came with running a ranch. Josephine planted a garden as Samuel had imagined, putting in vegetables and herbs and a section of flowers just for beauty. She was on her knees in the dirt transplanting tomato seedlings when she suddenly felt violently ill. The sickness continued for weeks, always in the morning, and Josephine knew what it meant even before the doctor from Granite rode out to confirm it. She was pregnant, due sometime in late December or early January. She told Samuel that evening as he came in from checking on a sick cow, blurting it out before her courage could fail. "I am going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully for any sign of doubt or concern. Samuel's reaction was immediate and joyful. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests about making her dizzy, laughing with pure delight. "We are going to have a baby," he corrected, setting her down gently and placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "A son or a daughter, our child." "You are happy?" Josephine asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy?" Samuel repeated. "Josephine, I am beyond happy. I am blessed. We are blessed." Then his expression sobered slightly. "Are you happy? Are you well? Is everything all right?" "I am perfectly well," Josephine assured him, "just sick in the mornings, which the doctor says is normal. And yes, I'm happy. I'm terrified too, but happy." "What are you afraid of?" Samuel asked gently. Josephine looked away, her hand going to her scarred cheek. "That the baby will be marked because of me, that people will say cruel things, that I will not be a good mother." Samuel took her face in both hands, making her meet his eyes. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "You are going to be an excellent mother. Our child is going to be perfect and healthy and loved beyond measure, and if anyone says anything cruel, they will answer to me. Do you understand?" Josephine nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I understand." The pregnancy progressed normally through summer and into fall. Josephine's body changed in ways that delighted Samuel, who would place his hands on her growing belly and talk to their unborn child, telling stories about the ranch and making promises about teaching them to ride and rope and read. Josephine continued her sewing work until she grew too large to sit comfortably at the table, then switched to handwork she could do while reclining. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in late November. By December, Josephine was large and uncomfortable, waddling more than walking, suffering from a sore back and swollen ankles. Samuel was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if she should rest more. Josephine loved him for it, even when she wanted to throttle him for fussing. Her labor started on a bitter cold morning in early January of 1879, just as a new storm was moving in. Samuel rode hard for the doctor, praying the man would make it before the snow got too heavy. The doctor arrived with barely an hour to spare before the storm hit in earnest, and Samuel spent the next 8 hours pacing the length of the house while Josephine labored in their bedroom. When he finally heard the cry of a baby, Samuel nearly fell to his knees with relief. The doctor emerged a few minutes later, tired but smiling. "You have a son," he announced, "a healthy boy, and your wife is doing well." Samuel rushed into the bedroom to find Josephine propped against pillows, exhausted and sweaty and more beautiful than he had ever seen her, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Samuel," she said softly, "come meet your son." The baby was perfect, with a full head of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. Samuel reached out with a trembling hand to touch his son's face, overcome with emotion. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. "Thank you, Josephine. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas after Samuel's father and the middle name John after Josephine's. Young Thomas was a good baby, sleeping well and eating heartily, and watching Samuel with his son made Josephine fall in love with her husband all over again. Samuel was gentle and patient, learning to change diapers and soothe crying and rock the baby to sleep. He would hold Thomas for hours, just staring at his face, marveling at the miracle of this new life. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Samuel's hard work and good management meant the herd grew steadily, and Josephine's sewing business expanded to include customers from other towns. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, able to save a little each year and plan for the future. Thomas had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and he was a happy child, always laughing and exploring. When he was old enough to ask questions, he noticed his mother's scars and asked about them with the blunt curiosity of the very young. Josephine explained in simple terms that a bad person had hurt her before Thomas was born, but that she was fine now. "Does it hurt?" Thomas asked, reaching up to touch her face with small, gentle fingers. "Not anymore," Josephine said, and it was true. The physical pain had long since faded, and the emotional wounds had healed in the warmth of Samuel's love and the joy of her family. "Good," Thomas said simply, and went back to playing with his wooden horses, unconcerned. To him, his mother's face was simply his mother's face, as normal and unremarkable as anything else in his world. When Thomas was 3, Josephine became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, leaving her more tired and sick than before. Samuel worried constantly, but Josephine was confident everything would be fine. She was right. In the summer of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline, a tiny thing with Samuel's gray eyes and Josephine's honey-colored hair. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, seasons passing with their predictable patterns. Thomas started learning to help with ranch chores as soon as he was old enough, following his father everywhere with devoted determination. Caroline grew into a bright, sweet-natured little girl who loved helping her mother with sewing and gardening. The people of Granite gradually accepted the Irving family, though there were always those who whispered about Josephine's appearance. Samuel and Josephine stopped going into town together except when necessary, finding it easier to avoid the stares and whispers. Their social circle consisted mainly of neighboring ranchers and their families, people who judged them by their character and hard work rather than Josephine's scars. It was when Thomas was 7 and Caroline 4 that they received unexpected news. Margaret Preston, the woman who had thrown acid in Josephine's face all those years ago, had died in prison in Denver. The sheriff rode out to deliver the news personally, perhaps expecting some reaction from Josephine. Instead, she simply nodded and thanked him for the information. After the sheriff left, Samuel found Josephine standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the mountains. "Are you all right?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "I feel nothing," Josephine said slowly. "I thought I would feel something, anger or satisfaction or grief, but there is just nothing. That woman took so much from me, but she also gave me something, in a strange way. If she had not attacked me, I would probably still be alone in that dress shop in town, working myself to the bone and never finding this." She gestured around their home, at the life they had built. "She gave you nothing," Samuel said firmly. "You built this life despite what she did, not because of it. Your strength, your courage, your determination to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless, that is what brought you here. That is what made this life possible." Josephine turned to him, this man who had seen her truly from the very beginning, and smiled. "You are right," she said. "I built this, we built this, and it is more than I ever dreamed possible." Samuel kissed her, soft and sweet, still making her heart flutter after all these years. "I love you," he said against her lips. "From the first moment I saw those beautiful eyes of yours, I have loved you. I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Josephine said. "You saved me, Samuel. You showed me that my life was not over, that I was still worthy of love and respect and happiness. You gave me everything." They stood together at the window for a long time, watching their children play in the yard, listening to Thomas explain to Caroline how to properly rope a fence post. This was their legacy, Josephine thought, not scars or pain or jealousy, but love and family and the good life they had worked so hard to build. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease and horses injured in accidents. There were also moments of pure happiness. Thomas breaking his first horse at 13 with his father watching proudly. Carolyn winning a ribbon at the county fair for her sewing when she was 12. Samuel's hair started showing gray at his temples, and lines appeared at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Josephine found her own body changing with age, becoming softer and rounder, her honey hair streaking with silver. But Samuel still looked at her with the same love and desire he had shown on their wedding night, still told her she was beautiful, still traced her scars with gentle fingers, and kissed every part of her face with equal tenderness. When Thomas was 18, he announced his intention to buy land adjoining theirs and start his own ranch. Samuel helped him negotiate the purchase and plan the layout of buildings, and Josephine tried not to cry at the thought of her son living anywhere but under their roof. But she was proud too, seeing the fine young man Thomas had become, responsible and hard-working and kind. Carolyn showed no interest in marriage, instead becoming an increasingly skilled seamstress, who took over much of Josephine's business as her mother's fingers grew stiff with age. She was content to live at home, working on her sewing and helping manage the household, claiming she had no need of a husband when she had a perfectly good family already. It was on their 20th wedding anniversary that Samuel gave Josephine a gift that made her cry. It was a small portrait painted by an artist from Denver whom Samuel had secretly commissioned months earlier. The portrait showed Josephine as she was now, at 44 years old, her face clearly showing both her scars and her smile. But what made Josephine weep was the way the artist had captured Samuel's vision of her, the beauty and strength and grace that shone through despite the damaged skin. "This is how I see you," Samuel said softly, watching her study the portrait. "This is what I have always seen, not the scars, though they are part of you, but the whole woman, beautiful and strong and mine." "It is perfect," Josephine whispered. "You are perfect. This life we have built is perfect." They hung the portrait in the parlor, where it would remain for the rest of their lives, a testament to love that saw beyond surface appearance to the truth beneath. More years passed, bringing grandchildren as Thomas married and started his own family. His wife was a sweet-natured woman from a neighboring ranch, and she accepted Josephine's appearance without question, having grown up hearing stories of the Irvings and their love story. Caroline eventually married as well, at 30, to a quiet rancher who loved her fierce independence and sharp wit. Samuel and Josephine grew old together, their bodies failing in small ways, but their love remaining strong. Samuel's joints grew stiff from years of hard work, and Josephine's eyesight weakened until she could no longer do fine sewing. But they still held hands while sitting on the porch in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with love that had deepened and strengthened over decades. It was Samuel who went first, in the winter of 1898, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. Josephine woke to find him cold beside her, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. She did not scream or wail, simply pressed a kiss to his forehead and whispered, "Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me." The funeral was well attended, with neighboring ranchers and townspeople coming to pay their respects to a man who had been respected for his integrity and hard work. Josephine stood straight and strong through it all, her children and grandchildren surrounding her, accepting condolences with grace. But that night, alone in the bed she had shared with Samuel for 20 years, she finally allowed herself to weep for the loss of the man who had been her salvation and her great love. Josephine lived 7 more years, staying in the ranch house with Caroline, who had moved back after her husband died. She spent her days with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the wild days of the frontier, about how love could flourish even in the hardest circumstances. She taught the girls to sew and the boys to appreciate good craftsmanship, passing on the skills her own mother had taught her so many years ago. On a warm spring morning in 1905, Josephine passed away in her sleep, just as Samuel had, at the age of 70. She was buried beside her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones standing side by side. The inscription on hers, chosen by Carolyn, read simply, "Josephine Fletcher Irving, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She was beautiful. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each new owner hearing the story of Samuel and Josephine, the cowboy and the scarred woman who had built a life and a legacy out of love and determination. Young couples would sometimes ride out to see the graves on the hill, finding inspiration in the story of two people who had refused to let cruelty and judgment prevent them from finding happiness together. The portrait still hung in the house, passed down through the family, a reminder that true beauty lies not in perfect features, but in strength of character and the courage to love despite all obstacles. And if you looked closely at that portrait, at Josephine's scarred face and knowing smile, you could almost see what Samuel had seen all those years ago in the general store in Granite, a woman with the most beautiful eyes in the world and a spirit that refused to be broken. Their love story became legend in the area, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from embellishment, but the essential truth remained unchanged. A cowboy had seen past scars to the woman beneath, had loved her completely and without reservation, and together they had built something lasting and true. In a time and place where life was hard and often cruel, where judgment came swift and harsh, they had created their own small paradise, proving that love could indeed conquer all obstacles when two people committed fully to seeing the best in each other. The dress shop in Granite that Josephine had once owned was eventually torn down and replaced with a bank, then, later, a hardware store. Few people remembered the young seamstress who had been attacked there, and fewer still connected that tragic figure with the respected matriarch of the Irving Ranch. But for those who knew the full story, who understood what Josephine and Samuel had overcome to build their life together, the tale served as a reminder that healing was possible, that redemption could be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest love stories began in the darkest moments. Thomas Irving, in his old age, would tell his own grandchildren about his parents, describing how his father had looked at his mother with such devotion that it made everyone who saw them understand what love truly meant. He remembered moments from his childhood, his father coming in from working the ranch and immediately seeking out his mother, the way they would touch hands in passing, how they seemed to communicate without words after years together. "Your great-grandmother was the strongest person I ever knew," Thomas would say. "She survived something that would have broken most people, and she built a good life anyway. But your great-grandfather, he was special too. He had the gift of seeing people truly, of looking past what the world showed him to the reality beneath. Together, they taught me what it means to love someone completely, to see their whole self and choose them anyway, every single day." Caroline, for her part, kept her mother's sewing supplies and used them in her own work, feeling connected to Josephine through the familiar weight of her scissors and the smooth wood of her needle case. She passed these items down to her own daughters, along with stories of Josephine's skill and determination, her refusal to let circumstances define her worth. The story of how Samuel and Josephine met was Caroline's favorite to tell. She would describe her father walking into that general store, seeing a woman being shunned and scorned, and choosing kindness. "He could have walked away," Caroline would say. "Most men would have. But your grandfather saw your grandmother's eyes, really saw them, and he recognized something precious. He decided in that moment to know her, to see past what others saw, and that decision changed everything." As decades passed and the 20th century brought changes to Colorado and the West, the Irving Ranch adapted and survived. The cattle industry changed, new technologies arrived, the wild frontier became settled and civilized. But the foundation that Samuel and Josephine had built remained strong, a testament to hard work and love and the courage to build a life on your own terms. The house they had built together, with its specially reinforced roof to handle heavy snow and its windows positioned to catch the morning light, stood for over 100 years before finally being replaced with a more modern structure. But even then, the new house was built on the same spot, overlooking the same valley, maintaining the connection to the couple who had started it all. In local historical records and family genealogies, Samuel and Josephine Irving were noted as pioneers, early settlers who had built a successful ranch through hard work and determination. But those who knew the full story understood they were something more, proof that even in hard times, even when the world seemed determined to crush hope, Love could flourish and grow and create something beautiful. The years following Samuel's death had been hard for Josephine, but she had survived them with the same strength that had carried her through every other trial. She had continued to run the ranch with Thomas's help, had watched her children build their own families, had held great-grandchildren in her arms before she died. She had lived to see the turn of the century, to witness the end of the frontier era and the beginning of something new. And through it all, she had carried Samuel's love with her, a constant presence that sustained her even after he was gone. On the day Josephine died, Caroline found a letter in her mother's Bible, written in Josephine's careful hand, and dated shortly after Samuel's funeral. The letter was addressed to her children and grandchildren, to be read after her death. In it, Josephine had written about her life, about the attack that had scarred her, about meeting Samuel and building a life with him. The final paragraph read, "I want you all to know that despite everything I endured, despite the pain and the fear and the cruelty I experienced, I would not change my life. Every scar was worth it because it led me to your grandfather, your father, the man who taught me what love truly means. He saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I felt worthless, loved me when I thought I was unlovable. Build your lives on that kind of love, the kind that sees truly and loves completely. That is the greatest legacy I can leave you." Caroline read this letter aloud at Josephine's funeral, her voice breaking with emotion. There was not a dry eye among the gathered family and friends. They understood, perhaps for the first time, the full depth of what Samuel and Josephine had meant to each other, the profound impact their love had on everyone around them. The ranch continued under Thomas's management, and then his sons and his grandsons after that. Each generation added their own touches and improvements, but they all maintained the essential character of the place, the connection to the land and the values that Samuel and Josephine had established. The Irving Ranch became known for treating its workers fairly, for producing quality cattle, for being run by people who understood that success meant more than just profit. In the town of Granite, which grew from a rough mining settlement into a proper small town, the story of Samuel and Josephine eventually became part of local lore. Young people would sometimes ask about the cowboy and the scarred woman, and old-timers would tell the tale, often embellished with details that may or may not have been true. But the core of the story remained the same, a simple truth about seeing past surface appearances to recognize real beauty. The bench on the hill where Samuel and Josephine were buried became a popular spot for couples in later years. Young lovers would sit there at sunset, looking out over the valley, and make promises to each other about loving truly and seeing clearly. Some said if you sat there quietly at twilight, you could almost hear the echo of conversations long past, the soft murmur of Samuel and Josephine talking together as they watched the sun set over their land. Whether that was true or just romantic fancy, it did not really matter. What mattered was that their love had created ripples that spread far beyond their own lives, touching future generations and inspiring others to love bravely and without reservation. In a world that often valued surface beauty above all else, Samuel and Josephine had proven that real beauty lay deeper, in the eyes that reflected the soul, in the strength that survived hardship, in the courage to keep going when everything seemed lost. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually spread across Colorado and beyond, carrying with them the story of their ancestors and the values they had embodied. Some became ranchers like Samuel, some became artists and teachers and entrepreneurs. But all of them carried forward the understanding that true worth had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with character and heart. As the 21st century arrived and the world changed in ways Samuel and Josephine could never have imagined, their story remained relevant. In an age of social media and constant comparison, of filtered images and unrealistic beauty standards, the tale of a cowboy who saw past scars to recognize true beauty resonated with people searching for authentic connection. The portrait that Samuel had commissioned, showing Josephine's scarred face with love and honesty, was eventually donated to a local historical museum where it hung with a plaque telling their story. Visitors to the museum would often stop in front of that portrait, reading the story beneath it, seeing the woman who looked out from the canvas with such intelligence and warmth in her eyes. Many found themselves moved by the simple truth of it, the reminder that love was about seeing and being seen, about accepting and being accepted, about choosing each other despite and because of all the ways life had shaped you. The original ranch house where Samuel and Josephine had raised their children, though long since replaced, had left its mark on the land. The foundation stones could still be seen, marking the spot where a family had been built, where love had triumphed over cruelty, where two people had refused to let circumstances define their happiness. Wildflowers grew there in the spring, purple lupin and yellow balsam root, nature's way of honoring ground that had witnessed so much life and love. In the end, Samuel and Josephine's story was not about tragedy or disfigurement or overcoming odds. It was about something much simpler and more profound. It was about a man who had the wisdom to see truly and a woman who had the courage to be seen. It was about building a life one day at a time, facing challenges together, creating something lasting out of love and commitment and hard work. It was about finding beauty in unexpected places and refusing to let the world's judgment dictate your worth. Their love had been tested by hardship and strengthened by adversity. It had grown from attraction and respect into something deep and enduring, the kind of love that sustained them through decades of ordinary days and extraordinary challenges. They had built not just a ranch, but a legacy, not just a family, but an example, not just a life, but a love story that would inspire others for generations to come. And if you had asked either of them in those final years they shared together whether they would change anything about their lives, they would have answered with a resounding no. The scars, the struggles, the hardships had all been part of the journey that brought them together and kept them together. They had found in each other exactly what they needed, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful that would outlast them both. The sun still rises over the valley where they lived and loved, illuminating the same mountains they watched together for so many years. The stream still runs clear and cold through the meadow where their cattle grazed. The land still holds the imprint of their presence, shaped by their hands in their dreams. And somewhere in the earth of that hillside where they rest together, the story of their love continues, a quiet testament to the power of seeing truly and loving completely, of recognizing beauty where others saw only scars, of building forever from a single moment of kindness in a dusty general store in Granite, Colorado in the spring of 1878.